Okay, let's try this again. Welcome to Forking Off, the podcast for people who said no to just following orders, where we explore the very personal decisions behind leaving federal service, whether by choice or by force. Every departure has a story, and we're here to share them.
Hi, and welcome to this episode of Forking Off. I'm Jill Fields.
And I'm Philip Fields.
And today we have with us Sarah Ellison Hernandez. Hi, Sarah.
Hi, Jill. Hi, Philip.
Thanks for joining us today. Why don't we go ahead and get us started with your bluff, your bottom line up front.
So I'm Sarah Ellison Hernandez. I was formerly with the Executive Office for Immigration Review, EOIR, and I served in the capacity as an immigration judge at the Dallas Immigration Court. I left federal service as part of the second deferred resignation offer, or the second fork in the road, and I have been officially separated from government service since September 30th of this year.
Tell us about your background and how did you end up in public service?
Pretty much my entire legal career has been in public service. I briefly worked for a private law firm in San Antonio upon graduating law school in 2009, but then very quickly went to the DA's office. So I served in a state capacity as a prosecutor. And then in 2014, I got the dream job and I got to be an assistant United States attorney for the Southern District of Texas out of Laredo, Texas. I served there as a prosecutor for just about 3 years. And then I had a friend who worked for the Department of Homeland Security as an attorney for ICE, technically as an attorney for OPLA, but a lot of people refer to them as ICE attorneys. And it was just really interesting what she was doing. I was very intrigued by the immigration world. I personally love to travel. I love hearing people's stories. And in talking about that, I really was drawn to the idea of being an immigration judge. Being a judge was something I'd always wanted to do. And then seeing it in this capacity, I found very interesting, very inviting, very challenging. And I just decided, ultimately, that's what I want to do with my life. That is the goal. So in 2017, I left and went to the Department of Homeland Security. I worked for OPLA as an ICE attorney out of Pearsall, Texas. I only did that for about 8 or 9 months. And then in the first Trump administration, I was then appointed as an immigration judge. Just thinking back on that, that was really the highlight of my career for me. When I got that job, I remember crying and calling my mom and telling her I got the job. I remember taking my oath of office, thinking about that still even now gets me emotional. I really thought that was going to be my forever job, my call to life, my retirement job, all the things. I was very happy. I was assigned to the Fort Worth Immigration Adjudication Center, which had recently opened, and then later I transferred to the Dallas Immigration Court. But really, my whole career has been in a service capacity of some sort to the government, and especially working for the federal government, taking that oath, having that call to service. That was deeply profound for me, just as a person and as a pivotal moment in my life, especially getting this job as an immigration judge.
You got this job, this dream job, this pivotal moment. You're there, you're at this career, an immigration judge. What happened? What led to the decision to leave?
It's a little interconnected with some issues just within EOIR and the way immigration courts are structured. Before Trump 2.0 came on the scene, I'd been appointed in the first Trump administration, and there were some drastic changes from the ways immigration court had previously been run, some of the practices and policies. But as federal employees, we all know sometimes that happens with administration changes, but there's normally not a concern that these changes are outside of the confines of the law. It's just different priorities, different adherences, and you kind of roll with that and go on. So when Trump 2.0 came on, I had some frustrations with what was happening within EOIR. I had some frustrations with what was happening in the Dallas court specifically, and some practices there that I thought were hindering us and preventing us to really do our jobs to the best of our ability. Especially beginning in January of this year, the immediate change in the tide and kind of the vitriol that was coming out of the current administration towards federal employees and upper management was very distinct to me and very different from what I had experienced in the past with other administrations and administration changes. And then I started to see these little kind of breadcrumbs that I was like, I feel like they're laying a foundation for something. I don't know what, but I feel like this administration is trying to go somewhere when it comes to immigration law and policy. And some of those things that I distinctly remember were things, for example, all the policy memos, where anyone who was in government at that time was receiving multiple memos a day. They were highly charged. I'd like to refer them as spicy. They were unlike other policy memos we had ever received. And I felt like the way that they were intentionally worded, especially in consideration of the current environment where people were just getting fired left and right. I was like, I feel like they're really laying the groundwork here to hold anyone responsible for any little infraction, no matter what it is, so that they can get rid of more people. So that was a concern. A little buzz light went off for me, a little red light. Then we saw things like receiving the memos about the Department of State reports, which in immigration court, the Department of State reports about country conditions in other countries. It's called the Human Rights Practices Report, is pretty important. We rely on those in almost all of our cases in one way or another. So when I started receiving information that those were going to change, they would no longer include information about women in other countries, people with disabilities, or any information about gender or sex biases. I was like, okay, this is a big change. This is something that we haven't seen before. They've always traditionally been included. And I felt like that was kind of one of the first little moments of change where I'm like, this administration is really taking away protections for everyone, not just like they're saying on TV that it's only criminals and, the bad people we're going to go after. And then we had things where there were other policy changes. For instance, we started getting memos about pre-termitting asylum applications. So they wanted us to start denying applications on their face without having a full hearing. And that made me feel a little squeamish. And I was like, well, I'm uncomfortable with this, but, I can kind of get around it. Even if I feel like based on new policy, I need to pretermit an asylum application, someone can still proceed on Convention Against Torture, which I was not pretermitting. And that would still allow evidence to come in. You can always sua sponte reconsider the asylum application. So I was like, okay, I can deal with that for now. And then we had the Obrego Garcia case, which was pivotal for me. It dealt directly with immigration. We had an individual who had an order of withholding of removal preventing him to going back to El Salvador, and the department sent him back to El Salvador. They lied about the circumstances in which that happened. And basically at that moment, what I was seeing personally was an intentional defiance of the law and of court order. And so under the environment, all these things have been happening. People have been getting fired. Policy changes have been astronomically or changing on astronomical levels. And then we have this case, which to me just highlighted this administration's willingness to defy the law openly and blatantly, kind of saying, what are you going to do about it, court? All of this combined with other concerns I had about the logistics of court were kind of just all coming together at this point in time. And I felt like I was in that moment where, the warning signals are going off, like there's a red light here, it's buzzing, the lights are getting brighter, the noise is getting louder. I felt like my gut was telling me danger, danger, danger. But then you're looking around, everybody's still doing their jobs. And so I kind of had this period of time when the first fork offer, whatever you want to call it, we call it DRIP in EORR, the deferred resignation offer. But when the first DRIP offer came out, I was like, I think it's a trap. It was so intentionally worded, and they were being so quiet about whether immigration judges could actually apply or if they were considered immigration enforcement. And I felt like they were trying to get us to say, oh, if you want this, well, then you just don't want to be here, and we're just going to deny you from the program and fire you. And I was like, and I didn't feel right about that either. And so I was very nervous. And so I just kept my head down. And I had this feeling of something's coming. Some moment in time is coming where I'm going to be asked to do something that I don't believe I should do under the law. But we're not there yet. We're not there yet. I'm going to keep going. We're going to see what happens. And really just over time with all these new policies and all these new cases coming out, and then we're seeing DOJ prosecutors getting fired for disobeying attorney general orders, even though they're in direct contradiction of the law. I just knew, I was like, this is not going to end well. Like, I don't know where we're headed, but it's getting worse. And I just got to the point where I didn't want to get to the end yet. That point where it's like, I haven't violated the law. I haven't been asked to directly violate the law yet, but I felt like it was coming and I didn't want to get to that point. Having served in the U.S. Attorney's Office as an AUSA and also being an immigration judge, technically I'm just a DOJ attorney, even though I wear the title of judge and adjudicate claims. I felt like those were like my brothers and sisters being fired, even though I didn't know them personally. And
Yeah,
it
it's
just got to this
hard.
moment where it is. And you're seeing this, and all of these people are good people. And that was one of the things that frustrated me. I felt like as soon as Trump 2.0 came on, it was just civil servants are bad, they're ill-willed, they're lazy, they're not doing their jobs. And everything I was seeing was the opposite. Everything I had experienced was the opposite. And I'm sure y'all can speak to that too. I mean, you give up a
Yeah.
lot to be a federal servant.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. It was a little different in the FBI because they were working from the top down. But with DOJ, yeah, there were line attorneys
Hmm.
being fired. How terrifying. But Sarah,
Yeah.
like you mentioned, like with the Abrego Garcia case, the blatant disregard for the court orders. As an immigration judge, were you afraid that was going to happen with your cases of them not following?
But yes, I was directly afraid of that. Yes.
I think when we spoke with you before, you sort of outlined how the immigration judges are part of DOJ. And I think you had mentioned that technically the attorney general's orders and things are binding upon you. And so is that sort of, I guess, where that concern
Yes.
comes from?
Yes. The way it works is every judge, no matter if you're a circuit judge, a state judge, if you're an immigration judge, the judges above you in your pipeline, if they issue case law, it's binding on you. You have to follow it. And so the way immigration court is structured is we're a department of the DOJ. And so we have the Board of Immigration Appeals. It is also within the Department of DOJ. And me, the appellate judges, all of us report directly to the Attorney General and then to the executive, which would be the president. So the Attorney General at any point in time can pull a case and issue binding case law. Also, the Board of Immigration Appeals, which is directly in line and reporting to the Attorney General and thus the president, like we are, any case law they issue is binding on us. And what I was afraid of after seeing the statements made in court and the disregard for the law is that they are going to warp case law to suit their needs. And at some point, it was going to come a time where I would have binding case law that I would be forced to follow, but I would morally and ethically feel like it was a intentional misconstruction of the law. And that is what we're seeing now. So I'm glad I left when I did. After I left, there were additional changes that came out. I'm sure everybody's seen on the news the cases getting dismissed and people getting put in expedited removal proceedings and being arrested at immigration court. And I believe that placing those people in expedited removal proceedings who have been here for 20 plus years, who have lives here and ties here, I believe they are not meant to be in those proceedings by law. And so I am thankful I left when I did, so I didn't have to directly make those decisions on the record as to why I would not be following the law as it was put upon me by the board. But I do believe that that's a real concern. And that goes to my logistical and kind of my prior issues with the construction of immigration court, because as long as we have that construction in place where we are bound to the Attorney General and thus the executive branch, really any president or any administration that comes in can issue those cases, can issue policies that are binding upon us, and in some way, control what we're doing. And you see that a lot with the administrations. You'll see a back and forth of extremes. But now we're seeing it in the context where not only is an extreme policy shift from Biden, but it's also extreme and it's pushing the boundaries of what is constitutionally allowable.
Since we're on the topic, immigration courts are sort of like a lot of people don't have a good understanding of how they work. So I was wondering if we could talk a little bit more about that. There are probably some people out there who think like the immigration courts are out to just help expedite the deportation of everybody that's going on right now. That hasn't been what I've seen at all. I've seen a lot of immigration judges who have been targeted by the administration. I also think a lot of people probably think that, somewhere like Texas, the immigration court is full of people from Mexico and immigrating to the United States, which I've found this website that has judges' records, and it looks like most of the asylum decisions that you probably proceeded over were like from El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala, and Nigeria and Venezuela. Like that's a little surprising to me. Like it's a pretty, and there's still 12% of other there's 30% other. So there's still a lot of other stuff in there. That's really interesting to me. It seems like it's a pretty broad range of.
It is. It's a broad range of countries, of peoples, of languages, of experiences. And that's one of the things I loved about it, and that's what I find so intriguing about immigration practice, especially being, in a major city in the Dallas area. We do. I mean, yeah, a lot of people assume it's only Mexican nationals that are going to be here or in court. But I mean, it's people from all over and for all different types of reasons. I've had cases where, I granted a case once where a woman escaped an honor killing in India. I've granted cases where a mentally disabled child from Africa who ultimately would have been institutionalized and treated like an animal if they went back was able to make it here with the help of a family member. I've had cases where people are fleeing authoritarian regimes. I've had cases where people are fleeing domestic violence, and all of it really runs the gamut of issues. And some of those are grantable, some of them aren't, and you just have to take every case as it comes. But the variance you see is really awesome. And just a side note, it's really interesting too in immigration court when you get a language that you've never even heard of. Like I always thought that was so interesting. Like, oh, okay, well, this is new. I'm very excited to hear this. But yeah, it affects really the gamut of people and types of people. And yeah, I think people should have an awareness of that, because it is not a black or white situation. It's not a this country is good, this country is bad situation. It really is very layered and complex, actually.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think those are great examples of things that everybody should want to help somebody out with, right?
Yeah. And what's so frustrating for me as part of this administration is when I was talking earlier about the Department of State reports, there are countries, for example, where being a woman is tantamount to a death sentence, depending on who you are, or how you act, or what you're willing to do. So example, that honor killing from India, a lot of that had to do with contextually how women are treated there, whether or not the government was willing to intervene. But now all that's going to be erased from the Department of State report. So you're going to have to get that evidence on your own. And if you're pro se, that's very difficult to do. And it's the same thing with gender bias. The case that I mentioned about the individual who was mentally handicapped, we relied on evidence of how the state treated those people. And all of that's going to be wiped out. And seeing that and seeing those protections, even though it's just a small thing, it has a big impact. Seeing that taken away from people who need it, who otherwise will not have it, and who really, these people are the people who the laws are there to protect. We want to grant asylum to people who need asylum. And I feel like right now what they're doing is really just trying to deny it to everyone. I even read recently that they are wanting to reduce the total number of refugees they're allowed to come here. The cap is incredibly small. And I'm like, America stands for the protection of those who need it. That's what we're here for. And so all of that has been very disheartening to me. And some of it I really, not only is it disheartening and I don't like it, but some of it I really don't feel is legal with some of the policies that they're trying to push.
I've heard you use the term pro se a couple of times. Jill went to law school. I didn't. Can you explain?
Feel free to call me out for legal jargon anytime. It's easy to slip into. But pro se is someone who is unrepresented. So they're representing themselves in immigration court, which I think is difficult really in any court, but in immigration court in particular. I think it's very difficult for people to sufficiently represent themselves. And another thing I will note that the administration has done they have ended all funding to programs that would provide representation to children. So when 3 and 5-year-old siblings are in court alone and their parents aren't here and they don't have an attorney, they will not be getting one, and they will not have access to any service that can help provide them one. And I've handled dockets like that temporarily as a judge. And in my mind, there's no reason to make a 3-year-old and 5-year-old represent themselves in court.
Yeah, that's just terrifying to think, and to think for those poor children who they're in a court, they're already confused as to what's going on. They're not with their parents.
Yeah.
I'm sure they were told, oh, well, you're going here because this is safe and this is good for you. And then to be just tossed in there by yourself.
Now those children are going to grow up knowing or at least believing that America is not the safe haven that everybody in the world tells them.
Yeah.
Depending on where they're from and what they go back to, that could be creating problems for us for decades to come. Something that I found interesting when I was sort of preparing for this is, and I don't know the veracity of this statistic, it's on trackreports.org. We'll include a link in the show notes, but it said almost 77% of asylum seekers who aren't represented by an attorney are denied. I think that's probably a nationwide stat. Even as an adult, you're in another country, you're probably still learning the language. It's just, I can't
and
imagine.
You're also largely dealing with a population who doesn't have the level of education that most Americans have. Most people in other countries, especially if they grow up economically disadvantaged, they stop school very young. So it's not uncommon to have people in immigration court, even that can't read or write, things like that. And what you're expecting is that this person's going to come to immigration court, explain all the legal mumbo jumbo that we have to explain to them, or I'm sorry, understand all the legal mumbo jumbo we have to explain to them, that they're going to understand adequately what evidence is, how to get online and find it, how to contact their home country and get official documents, how to get all of that translated and adequately submitted in the proper format. And they don't. And that's why you see so many denials. And immigration court is, its own beast. It is an administrative proceeding, it's a civil proceeding. So you don't have a right to an attorney. You don't have a right to assistance. And there's reasons for that. Constitutionally, we differentiate between administrative proceedings and criminal and other things. But it's really hard to believe that the average person is going to be able to come here and present the wrapped in a bow case that they sometimes need to present in order to get relief. And judges take that into account. We're trained to, and we all do that. So we have to understand that sometimes you have to accept things that are less than what you would require someone else because they are pro se. But it is an uphill battle. And then when you add on the layer of that, being a child, like we were speaking of earlier, even more so.
So, Sarah, you mentioned something that I want to point out. This is an administrative court. It is not a criminal court. It is an administrative process. And I think with all that's been out in the news lately, with all of the ICE raids, with all of the trying to do mass deportations, this is an administrative procedure. This is not a criminal procedure.
Yeah, so there's not all of the rights that you would normally be afforded in criminal court. I think a lot of people don't understand that, especially because everything you see on TV is criminal. And so people, I think, want to apply that to everything. The fact that people aren't guaranteed attorneys, the fact that there are less rights in general that are protected in administrative court, that's not just a Trump thing. That's just the nature of the proceedings. But I do believe that this administration is taking advantage of some of those to a degree we haven't seen before. And I also just inherently believe that there's still humanity that still has to come into place somewhere. And one thing that really frustrates me, for example, with the Abrego Garcia case, is we saw this notion of, in defying the court orders, the administration was saying, well, he's an MS-13 gang member, he's a criminal, kind of insinuating that criminals don't have rights or they don't deserve the same treatment as people who are non-criminals. But in our country, under our laws, they do get those things. And that's what I've also found very frustrating, and also a very dangerous rhetoric to get people on board with. Because if you're willing to treat anyone who's labeled a criminal a certain way, then what stops that flow? What stops anyone from being labeled a criminal and being treated similarly? And so I believe America is a country of laws. I believe we're a country of due process. We are literally a party to the Convention Against Torture. We don't believe in torture. We don't send people to countries that practice torture. That is what we stand for, what we believe, and the laws that we abide by. Also, the Eighth Amendment, which prevents inhumane treatment, of individuals. Like, all of these things also apply. I feel personally, just seeing some of the actions that have happened, that this administration truly believes if you're a criminal, you don't have rights. If you're a terrorist, you don't get due process. And I can understand on some level some people having the desire for that to be the case, but rule of law is what protects all of us. And that's why we apply it to those people as well. And to me, that is very important. And to me, that is one of the dangers I see in some of the practices of this administration.
Absolutely. We worked terrorism cases, like we built cases against terrorists, but those individuals, whether they were plotting a mass attack, they were leaving to go join ISIS in another country, they still were afforded the right of their day in court, their time to be heard, their right to an attorney. They were not considered guilty. You are not considered guilty until the determination of all of the evidence and whether a jury or a judge decides that.
Right.
Yeah, there's a huge distinction between the two things that you've laid out. If you're in an administrative court, there's no crime there, right? Or you'd be in criminal court. I worked terrorism cases all over the world, and I'm sure when we say terrorists get due process, there's somebody out there who's going to be like, what about the ones who are, being targeted by drone strikes? First of all, I want to differentiate between what we've traditionally called international terrorists and what the administration has now decided are terrorists. The labeling of drug cartels and other criminal organizations as terrorists does not in any way provide legal justification for the use of military force.
Right.
Those authorizations, they do open up certain sort of tools that are, like the FISA laws and things like that for collecting of information outside of the United States. But the use of drones in places like Syria and Iraq and Afghanistan, those were authorized by Congress as part of the authorizations for use of military force. And these people were determined not just to be terrorists, but to be military combatants who couldn't otherwise be stopped by the United States from carrying out attacks against the United States. That's such a hugely different thing than somebody who's on a boat in international waters and probably being forced to be in that situation at the risk to family or something like that. The terrorism stuff is just so far off.
And we saw the similar thing with, earlier in the year, I think it was like February or March. No, I think it was March, the Alien Enemies Act, using that as justification to remove people to another country without due process. There's a reason that act hadn't been used in forever, because it doesn't apply. There is no actual justification for it in this moment of time legally. And that was part of the wave that took Abrego Garcia. And then with him, yes, it's an administrative proceeding, but there's still due process within the confines of that administrative proceeding. And for him, he had an order of removal saying he could not go back to El Salvador. First, the administration said it was an accident, he was sent. Then all those people were fired. No, it wasn't an accident. He's a criminal, so we sent him. Well, if you want to send someone back to their home country when there's a standing order of withholding of removal in that country, there's a mechanism in place to do that. You would have to go and show changed circumstances, that the danger is no longer present in that home country, and then you can do it legally. But they just bypass all of that. And again, I think when you start doing those things, it's a slippery slope. I still feel like we haven't quite seen how far we're going to go, unfortunately.
Yeah. It's the question of, so what's next? Like, what are they going to do next? What right is going to be taken away from somebody next?
Yeah.
With immigration is integral to our country. We are a country of immigrants. I mean, that is what we were founded on, was this is a safe haven. This is a place where you can come for a better life. You can know that you're safe and that you will have opportunities here that you would not have elsewhere.
And, and that's my belief. America is a good country. We're a good country by our nature. We protect those who need protection. We afford due process and protections to everybody who's within the confines of our geographic area. That's just who we are. That's what we were built upon. When all of these changes started happening and I started seeing a little alarm bells, it was kind of like, am I crazy? Like, is no one else jumping up and down? Am I the only one? Do I need to calm down? Am I overreacting? Like, I was doubting myself that this was happening and this was a concern. But I will say that as things have continued, I think more people have jumped on the concern bandwagon. And also, since leaving and removing myself a little bit and just processing it more, I mean, the concern is justified. If there's anyone listening out there and you're wondering the same thing, you're not crazy. The concern is justified because there aren't any metaphysical guardrails that are just going to protect America. The guardrails are us. The guardrails are the people, or the attorneys, or the judges, or the people in power who are making the decisions. And so it is dependent upon us to say, no, this is not okay. The only way I felt like I could adequately do that and be in control of really my ability to do that was in leaving, unfortunately. And I know other people on your show have said the same thing. I'm sure you felt the same thing, but there was some guilt with that of leaving, am I leaving these people? Am I leaving the ship to sink? Am I doing nothing? Am I giving up? But ultimately, I think that is not the case. And I think standing in support of my own beliefs and talking to people like y'all, sharing our stories, supporting each other is the way we can make more of a stand and hopefully change.
Agreed. I know with us, it's been okay, well, if we're not there, and we've had a lot of people say, well, if you leave, who's left? And I'm like, there are still good people there. There are still good people who believe in the rule of law, who believe in the process, who believe in everything, and they are there. We could not remain where we were and continue to do the work that needed to be done. Like, we had been blocked off from being able to. We had to leave. There are still people in who can and are trying to follow the rule of law and are trying to follow the law. But being on the outside now, we are afforded more leeway of being able to say, hey, I was in this, something's going on, and we need to be concerned.
Right.
I mean, that's how I
Mhm.
feel.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
hope you feel that way too.
No, I do. And I just think it's a very personal decision for everyone as to what that point is and what you're comfortable with. I took my oath very seriously when I took an oath to defend the Constitution against enemies, foreign and domestic, and to follow the rule of law. And so I just knew, being so early on with all the changes, already feeling like there was a moral gray area I was having to operate in and create my own safeguards to protect due process. I just knew for me, I was not going to wait around until I really got in that position where it was like, are you willing to break the law? I will say there was no pressure to intentionally break the law where I was, although I know other DOJ attorneys have had that experience. But for me specifically, my fear was that case law was going to come out that I was bound by, that I would not be able to morally follow. And I'd probably just end up getting fired at some point anyways, honestly, because of that. But I just didn't want to be put in that position because I did take my oath seriously. I still do. Even though I'm not with the government anymore, I still believe in protecting the Constitution and fighting for it. And so now I will do that a different way. But
Yeah. So tell
you
us
know,
what you are doing now.
okay.
How
So
you're continuing to help others.
yeah. So now I'm opening, or I have opened my own immigration firm. It's a solo firm, fully remote. I will be representing individuals who need assistance in immigration in whatever form that may be. Also, I will be working with other attorneys and assisting them on complex cases or preparing for immigration court so they can best represent their clients. Really just trying to work with people to give everyone the best chance to present their case, which, doesn't always necessarily mean winning, but it does mean being afforded due process and representation and the best assistance that they can have. I'm very excited about that.
I love that. Finding a way to help them present the best case they can for the best opportunity to be able to come and live in this country. So Sarah, is there anything that would have changed your decision about leaving?
At that point in time, no. No, I think the concern there was so enrooted in me. By the time I finally did leave, I don't think anything else would have changed it. I think it was clear the policy directives that this administration was implementing. I think it was clear that they were willing to push the law as far as they could and even maybe beyond if they needed to successfully get to their or achieve their objectives. And so that was it for me. And I keep talking about the Abrego Garcia case, but it was implemental to my decision, or intrinsic to my decision to leave. Once I saw that on the record, this administration was going to lie, as that has been characterized by DOJ attorneys that have left. And once I saw that they were willing to flout court orders as an immigration judge and as someone who believes in the rule of law, that was it. So at that point, I knew I was leaving. I just didn't know when or how. And I was still just trying to operate to the best of my ability until I could leave.
Would you go back at any point?
I would not go back under this administration. In the future, I potentially might entertain being a judge again just because I love the job. I love the calling. It's such an important role. That would have to be under certain circumstances that I don't really foresee occurring anytime soon, because there are also still the problems of just the immigration courts and how they're laid out, their role within the executive. And especially after this experience, I feel like that's even more of a concern that people should be addressing and Congress should be addressing about the immigration courts. And really, they do, I believe, need to be an independent court to be truly effective and truly apply the law equally to everyone.
Yeah, that's something that I've been thinking about that I hadn't really put a lot of thought into before. A lot of our administrative processes that mirror our criminal processes, I feel like probably shouldn't fall under DOJ wholly. I don't know the right place to put them, but I feel like we've always taken for granted the fact that everybody is operating with noble intent, and all it takes is a few people to come in without that in mind to undermine the entire system.
Yeah. I mean, we could be an independent court and still be administrative. It's not like you have to go to the extreme and, change it entirely, but you will take away some of those influences from different partisan actors. You would also, I think, level the playing field because, a person whose case is heard under one administration will get a different result from someone a year later who happens to fall under a different one. And I believe the rules are there. We should apply them equally to all. Even administrative proceedings should be fair. That's what I believe.
Absolutely. Well, Sarah, thank you so much for joining us. Before we leave, is there anything else that you'd like to add?
I'll just say thank you all. Thank you all for doing this podcast. I love that
you.
you're having people on to talk about their experiences. And just a shout out to anyone out there who has either left the government or is in the government, but is just feeling unsupported. I think it's fair to say we're all here for you. We're all in the same boat. We all have a shared experience. If anyone needs assistance in any way or wants to start networking and doesn't know where to start, or just want someone to talk to, feel free to reach out to me. I'm on LinkedIn, message me, connect with me. I'm here to support you in any way because we've all been through it. We're still going through it. And so I think being there for each other is the most important thing.
Thank you so much, Sarah. We have loved having you on here and learning more. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for forking off with us.
Yes, thank y'all.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Forking Off. To our listeners still in government, remember, your integrity is worth more than your TSP. Leaving doesn't mean giving up on public service. It just means finding new ways to serve.
Until next time,
Keep your ethics,
keep your dignity.
and we'll keep telling these stories.
If you're a former Fed with a story to tell, or you're wrestling with your own ethical crossroads, reach out to us at info@forkingoff.com.
Today's episode was created, produced, and edited by Jill and Philip Fields. Special thanks to our guest, Sarah Ellison Hernandez. You can find more information about this episode at forkingoff.com. Follow us on Instagram, TikTok, Blue Sky, Mastodon, LinkedIn, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Join us Monday, December 15th.
As we talk with former USAID employee Allie Severson.
We all read Project 2025, and we knew that USAID was going to be kind of like a test case for how to dismantle the federal government. And the entire agency was decimated by Elon Musk. I remember I wrote in my journal, I was like, democracy died today. Everybody at USAID was laid off within 2 weeks of the fork being closed. So I was at this climate social justice residency, and we had to come up with a project that was focused on climate social justice. And I was like, all the stories that were wiped away from USAID should be captured in a way that's truthful and honest, and in a way that's honoring the 6 decades of service that people have dedicated into this. Ultimately, the exhibition was called The Unraveling of USAID. It was commentary about the agency and the history of the agency. And it was so incredibly powerful. On opening night, I was sitting on this piano bench and watching people perceive my art. And there were so many people that just stood in front of my paintings and cried. And I've never experienced anything like that. And it's raised $15,000. But I will say, the original is still for sale. I would love for it to be in a place that, many eyes could see. So if anybody has any leads of where you think that it should be, I would love to chat.